My latest book is basically about childhood, and it's very personal. It's about my own childhood, and it's been translated partly into English, and we're still thinking about the title. It would be something like "Pick Up Something But Hurry," which is quite a saying when you are a child and you kind of puzzle around and you want to look at something that parents very often or adults very often tell you to hurry up because you try to lose time, and so this is all about being a child. I grew up in East Berlin, but I also spent some time in the countryside, so I have this countryside childhood but also the city childhood, and at some point in my life I tried to remember that a lot of what makes me a personality as an adult comes from my childhood way more than all the things that I've learned when I was an adult. So, and also I was longing back for this time, and I started to write down what childhood is made of and what childhood memories are made of. And I realized that it is not so much like big events that I remembered, but rather like small things, like smells of things or sounds of things, or more like daily routines that were actually at the time probably somewhat boring, but when I remember them it makes me feel at home and I kind of like the memory of it. So I tried to look back, and I came up with the idea of 10 chapters, and for instance, I thought very important when you are a child is your nose, because a lot of smells that you smell when you are a child you save for the rest of your life, and then it can happen that later in life you meet this very smell from your childhood again, and when you smell it for a kind of short moment, you kind of almost like walk through a door into back into your childhood, and everything is all like almost there just the way it was. So, but then I also remembered that when we were children, there was always a child that had a nosebleed, or there was always something where your nose was involved. So, I mean, I don't know if I can show you this very chapter. It's called Nosebleeds, and it's about the fact that at school always some child has a nosebleed, and I was imagining it because the child was always told to tilt his head backwards, that it would be overflooded with blood, or like the fact that noses were like twisted and turned and of course picked, and then also the fact that I think everyone remembers that, like diving in the swimming pool, you would always get water in your nose and then it would really hurt in your head. Also the fact that it is about very strongly also about history, and like the first chapter, for instance, I go back in time and remember when I was in East Berlin and looked over the wall to the west and saw something on a building, and the way I thought about it, what it means, and the way I kind of realized that I live in a divided city and in a divided country. That I think is also of interest for children today, but also I think whenever I read this to children, I realize how very similar they still grow up, and what childhood is made of hasn't really changed a lot. When I made this book about childhood, I was quite often confronted with the fact that it was meant to be a book for children, and I thought maybe children don't really go back in time, and they don't have such a strong memory yet because they still are children. So how funny is it actually for a child to read a book about childhood and also consider him or herself as a child at the time when this one is still a child. So I finished the book and I thought like, maybe it is actually for adults to remember. But then I traveled a lot with this book and did workshops and readings, and I realized that also like children consider their own childhood and they go back in time when they were like very little children or like a little bigger, and so in workshops I realized that children quite well have actually quite an interesting view onto their own childhood. I think the age group was first considered to maybe start with any age of 12 to 14, 15, but then I noticed that a lot of adults buy it and read it, and or they buy it and read it, their smaller children, and kind of explain what it's all about. So I would say it's for all ages. I wouldn't really make an age group. Okay, my style of drawing basically comes from very simple drawing, and I think it happened at the time when I studied graphic design. I had a professor that offered a course for illustration, and she made us draw very simple things on black and white, and there would always be a drawing and a writing, like either like a simple drawing and a sentence, and it was always like the game with words and the drawing, and the way those two kind of mediums interact with each other. And this is what I've been doing in all my books. It's always that I write the stories or the poem. It's very often like a poem, or it's based on rhymes, and it's always necessary that together with the words you get the pictures, and they interact with each other and they need each other. That's, I think, pretty much my style.